Hello, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for joining us this evening or today. My name is Monica Wedlock-Kilpatrick, and I serve as the Vice President of Organizational and Leadership Development for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. The NBA is the Health and Social Service General Ministry of the Christian Church. Our mission is to inspire and connect the people and ministries of the church in the creation of communities of compassion and care, as well as to advocate for the well-being of all of humanity. For our history of over 130 years, NBA has been called to care for the least of these and to root all of our initiatives in the value and dignity of human life in serving a world that God so loves. To accomplish this mission takes more than compassion and empathy. It creates a responsibility to act in creating equity and justice for everyone. One of the ways we seek to connect people and ministries is through hosting innovative conversation groups. Innovative conversation groups are intentional conversation groups that, when appropriate, allow NBA to support emerging needs and ideas from disciples leaders, in a way that allows the NBA to deepen our effectiveness in resourcing the church around emerging health and social service subjects across the life of the church. These conversation groups meet regularly for 12 months around a forward-leaning subject matter that has emerged within the life of the church. NBA anticipates a variety of ways that these innovative conversation groups might emerge. We expect through NBA programs and gatherings, like-minded individuals will be able to connect and share issues important for addressing. We regularly receive requests while on the road, when we were on the road, about how NBA can support new ideas or relevant issues. Some topics might emerge from work with regional and general church ministry partners and or General Assembly resolutions. These conversation groups provide a unique avenue for engaging the church at all levels. And NBA will keep a running list of recommended conversation topics and interested persons as a tool for determining future innovative conversation groups. For today's webinar, we have both an introduction of NBA's first innovative conversation group, namely Whole Disciples, and their work related to the church's role in response to intimate partner violence, domestic violence. The group will share more about how they got connected and organized during their presentation. As we get started, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website at nbacares.org. Also, you may follow along via transcript using the Otter AI feature. Click the Otter AI icon at the top of your screen and select the View Transcript option. A new window will open and the transcript will populate automatically. Language translation is also available through Otter AI. So for today's topic, introducing Whole Disciples, resources for domestic violence awareness and prevention. Whole Disciples seeks to provide education for the denomination on the prevalence of domestic violence in our communities. Resolution GA 1928, adopted in 2019, calls on disciples to recognize their role in preventing domestic violence and to care for those who are suffering from trauma. Whole Disciples offers clergy and laity the tools to provide a compassionate and safe response. During this webinar, you will learn more about Whole Disciples and why awareness, prevention, and trauma-informed care are so greatly needed. This webinar can be used as a tool for discussion and a call to action in local communities, congregations, regions, and general church ministries. At the end of this presentation, we will have time for questions. So throughout the webinar, if you have a question that emerges, we welcome you to use the Q&A feature by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. Please include your email address so that if we are unable to get to your question due to time, we can follow up with you directly after the webinar is over. And to request technical assistance, you may use the chat feature or the Q&A feature. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available for future viewing on the NBA website in the coming weeks, and it will also be available on tethered1.org. So there are a number of faces, disciples, leaders that you see here on your screen who've said yes to the work of Whole Disciples. All of their names will be listed on a slide in just a moment, but I briefly want to introduce you to those who are speaking today. Reverend Courtney Armento, midwife pastor of the Blend Church family in Lancaster, California, and also co-author of the resolution GA 1928. And she provides visionary leadership for Whole Disciples. Reverend Amie Vanderford, co-founder of the Laboratory Church in Indianapolis, Indiana, and who also co-leads Whole Disciples. Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker, executive director of Greater Dayton Christian Connections and founder of Pastors Against Domestic Violence, an ecumenical ministry that trains pastors to be courtroom advocates for victims of domestic violence. And Yani Davis, peace pastor and peace poet, founder of My SupaNatural Life, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing holistic communal care for persons living with chronic conditions, and also a participant in the 2021 NBA Sent cohort. Welcome, panelists, and I'm going to turn it over to Courtney.
Thank you so much, Monica. I'm wondering if we will start with the slide deck now. And I will share with you, of course, again, and you can see on my screen, my name is Reverend Courtney Armento. When I was in seminary, it became clear to me that the ministry that God placed on my heart was around domestic violence. As I worked on projects and papers centered on this insidious social problem, I found that our denomination was lacking in resources and education around this subversive issue. During my research, I discovered Resolution 8520, the last resolution passed in the Christian church that specifically focused on the role of the church around domestic violence, which was passed in 1986. I was moved in that moment to revive this necessary conversation. I think we have a little bit of a technical difficulty wondering about our slides because I want to introduce Reverend Yvonne Mccoy.
Courtney, please go ahead with the introductions. We'll get the slides up. Sorry about that.
Perfect. A mutual friend introduced me to Reverend Yvonne Mccoy, a passionate pastor who also had a call on her life to impact the church around abuse education. After a short conversation, we became partners in co-authoring Resolution GA 1928. A short time later, Yvonne and I birthed our grassroots violence education and awareness mission, now known as Whole Disciples, that operates nationally to promote education and activism with the short-term goal of supporting leaders to construct a broad community based on abuse-specific care and the long-term goal of offering mainstream education for the younger generation so that they are hyper-aware regarding abuse dynamics and can opt out of harmful relationships sooner than later, thereby breaking harmful cycles of violence. Reverend Yvonne Hauser McCoy's vocation spanned more than 30 years. Can we forward the slide until we get to Yvonne's picture and my picture? There we go. Her career spanned more than 30 years, focusing on holistic health, healing, restoration, and wholeness for the mind, body, soul, and spirit. She was ordained in the Christian church and served as pastor of Floyd's Knobs Christian Church in Indiana. Yvonne was a preacher, teacher, board-certified chaplain, certified healing touch practitioner, and certified holistic life healer. We lost Yvonne last year to a degenerative lung condition, and we dedicate our work today to her and to survivors everywhere. Our milestones. It was not enough to write the resolution and celebrate its adoption. So often resolutions are written and celebrated for the day and fade into the background of obscurity. We have been on a journey of bringing a new dimension of wholeness to the denomination that supports weaving the resolution into the life of the church. Yvonne and I realized a need for a ministry that offers new insights on the culture of abuse and trauma, that offers tools and resources for support and strategies for sensitized response, along with ways to create sanctuary space for conversation and advocacy that provides avenues of empowerment for survivors. This has been our trajectory for delivering this awareness to our mainstream denomination. You might be asking, what is Whole doing? Whole disciples. We're here to empower church leaders with the skills and knowledge to see the unseen and support those dealing with harmful relationship dynamics. We are currently curating a universal clergy curriculum that will be available this fall. Right now, you can access my 5-hour self-study course entitled Unsilenced Domestic Violence. It is available on the Thresholds of the Soul platform. There are CEUs available for the course. A young adult workshop will be available from Whole this fall. Currently, there are resources to get you started on my website, tethered1.org. Whole is in the process of birthing a new website by the fall of this year. We are committed to becoming your journey partners in eradicating domestic and intimate partner violence. The resolution asks that this specialized training be a requirement for clergy standing throughout the denomination.
As my then husband and I sought Christian counseling from a Christian pastor who had a degree in counseling, a situation came up. When I explained that my then husband was stalking me electronically, this pastor, this Christian counselor, said to my then husband, "Is there a way you can continue and not let her know you're doing it?" I was in shock and disbelief because this trained counselor, this pastor who knew the story of past abuse would ask this question. I had the courage to say, "I don't believe this. This is the worst possible advice that I've ever heard." This pastor acknowledged my disheartened state and continued on to say, my then husband and I were all each other had, and he would continue to pray for our marriage to strengthen. As I pondered on this, I wonder how many pastors are praying for their congregants to remain in abusive marriages. This might not be you, but there is way more to responding appropriately to someone in this situation than urging folks to stay together.
Did you know that domestic violence is also a public health crisis because of the number of people it impacts within the US and around the world? In 1994, the CDC and the National Institute of Justice conducted a survey that provided the first national data on the incidences and prevalence of intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and stalking in the US. In 1994, Congress passed the Violence Against Women Act, which authorized coordinated community responses to prevent intimate partner violence and prevent grants to support women that were survivors of rape and also provide prevention and education. In 1996, the Research Council established a federally funded task force to address violence against women, with the CDC as the leading agency. It's 2021. What have we been called to do?
How many believe? We are going to poll the audience around a few questions related to the prevalence of violence in our communities. Will, can you assist with this feature? Please answer yes or no. First question, How many of you believe that domestic violence is happening in your community? Thank you. Next, click yes or no to the following statements if you agree or disagree with them. Domestic violence only happens in marginalized communities. Domestic violence happens mostly in Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. Domestic violence mainly happens in non-faith, unchurched communities. Medical professionals, doctors, clergy, military, and peace police officers are considered to be the top abusers. Domestic violence happens in established, middle, or upper class families. Last question, domestic violence happens everywhere. We can see the results of the polls. I don't know that we can see them, but let's just look a little closer.
Get the next slide. Oh, there we go.
There it is.
100% of folks believe that domestic violence is happening in their community. Domestic violence only happens in marginalized communities. Only 6% say yes. Most folks say no. Domestic violence happens mostly in BIPOC communities. 6% agree. Most say no. Domestic violence mainly happens in non-faith, unchurched communities. Only a small amount agree. Most folks say no. Medical professionals, doctors, clergy, military, peace and police officers are considered to be the top abusers. Most say yes. And there are a few that say no. 33% said no. Domestic violence happens in established middle or upper class families. 100% say yes. Domestic violence happens everywhere. 100% said yes. Thank you for answering. If we can move on to the next slide. Based on the statistics, one of these women is keeping a secret about living with abuse. 3 women per day are killed by current or former partners. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A woman is beaten every 9 seconds. I quote Jason Jeremias, another grassroots social justice advocate, when I say it is not their fault, it is ours. Next slide. Based on the statistics, 2 out of 3 children are exposed to trauma and violence. Children are likely to embody the traumatic byproducts of witnessing arguments, physical abuse, or through their own experience of neglect, psychological abuse, physical abuse, or other forms of harm. Moral injury occurs as a result of witnessing harms that children in these situations are unable to interrupt or stop. 30% of abused or neglected children will grow up to abuse their own children. Children who witness abuse will grow up and either become abusers or fall into abusive relationships. This is one aspect that denotes the perpetual cycle of abuse.
Based on the statistics, 1 in 4 men live with abuse. Men are often silenced by stigma, shame, judgment, and overall lack of understanding about violence. when it comes to abuse. Men often do not recognize the signs of domestic violence and intimate partner violence within their relationships and their homes. Often men are expected to take said abuse and violence without doing anything to defend, advocate, or remove themselves from these situations. What would the world look like if all genders knew the signs of abuse and how to heal? That's the kind of education that would impact the whole world. GA 1928 elucidates, whereas the myriad forms of violence are not exclusively physical, but include emotional, sexual, spiritual, and financial abuse, as well as manipulation, isolation, unequal power and control dynamics, threats and blame shifting, among other forms, occurring across age, ethnic, gender, and economic lines, among persons with disabilities, and among both heterosexual and same-sex couples. Based on statistics, 1 out of every 3 teens experiences dating violence. In these abusive and manipulative experiences, power and control are used unbeknownst to teens. Technology is often weaponized against them for power and control. Some examples: expecting to keep tabs on partners, expecting swift text replies or call answers, demanding passcodes and deceive photos, demanding loyalty and isolating teens from friends and family. So many instances of physical and psychological abuse are occurring in high schools, classrooms, and homes across America. The lack of education on healthy relationships is leading teens into the arms of people that don't care. Rather, they want control. When some of the signs aforementioned arise, teens should reach out to a trusted teacher, parent, or mentor, and spend time with individuals who will provide secure and safe environments. And based on the statistics, 15.7% of seniors are subject to abuse. Senior abuse is complicated and layered, as many seniors who experience abuse are reliant on their abusive caregivers for day-to-day support, and thus may have no recourse to report abuse. Abuse of seniors can include financial, psychological, physical, and emotional abuse. Abuse of seniors, in most cases, go unreported, and seniors live in terror daily. Seniors are in need of community and familial support, so abusive caregivers know that violence will not be tolerated. As leaders and people who care, it is up to us to report and follow through on instances of abuse within our communities.
So we've been throwing a lot of different statistics at you, and with all of those different groups in mind, it comes down to every 1 in 3 people experience domestic or intimate partner violence. Now, as you can see from this graphic, if you have a congregation of 120 people, which is what this graphic has, that means 45 people in your congregation have experienced domestic or intimate partner violence. This is why we need training for our pastors to help them see what is usually unseen. With this training that we're talking about, pastors will begin to be able to recognize the signs, to take steps to support and overcome the stigma that keeps people quiet when they experience abuse. And part of the reason why people stay quiet is because of the shame. Now, I'm going to read the first 2 excerpts from GA 1928 for you. Whereas domestic violence and intimate partner violence are pandemic public health problems, which are multi-generational, cyclical, and threaten the fabric of family life in society. Whereas domestic violence and intimate partner violence occurs across age, ethnic, gender, and socioeconomic lines, education levels, among persons with disabilities, and among both heterosexual and same-sex couples. Now, because of this, we as leaders are called to care because violence has been and continues to be everywhere. It affects everyone in some form or another. The way it has been normalized in our culture stems from the gender and racial roles we assign and promote on a systemic level, along with the way that we portray violence in every area of our lives, from history in school to daily news and entertainment. And this includes television, movies, sports, books, magazines, and social media. Violence against others has become so normalized because we normalize power for certain groups over other groups. And this powerlessness and objectification is what happens to those who do not have the power. Think about it this way. Even as a nation, we have nearly always been at war. This means that to really care about this issue, we must address the root cause, which we say is denial. And this stems because our entire culture and our immersion in it supports violence. So I did just mention that the many ways that our culture is violent, along with the power dynamics based on social locations, we need to look at why denial is so acceptable. It upholds the status quo. The power dynamics at play in this cannot be ignored or separated. Denial happens because certain people in certain positions of power benefit from things staying the way that they are. Domestic and intimate partner violence are acceptable because systems of violence are acceptable. The larger cultural power disparities and support of them carry the violence down to the very personal level. People are socialized to hide the effects of abuse in public due to embarrassment, shame, not having a safe space, and because others do not feel comfortable responding. Abuse is so normalized in our culture that we even watch comedians tell jokes about it, and we accept that that is the way it is. Now, if this doesn't already answer the question, why don't people tell others about their abuse, or even worse, why don't they leave? Well, because our dominant culture denotes that victims are never to be believed. They are ignored and gaslighted to believe that there's nothing unusual about their experience, or even worse, that they caused their experience of harm. The Me Too movement created space for those who've experienced sexual abuse, but there's no such space or a movement for intimate partner violence.
So why is domestic violence the best kept secret? Shame, stigma, silence. Our work is to dismantle S3, those three S's. Due to the deep cultural embedded reality of shame and stigma around abuse, silence makes domestic and intimate partner violence the best kept secret. The CDC deems this insidious violence a public health crisis. We as Christians have the power and capacity to reduce this violence in our lifetimes. The statistics prove there are people suffering in silence in plain sight in your community. So many folks are coming out of the shadows to courageously tell their stories. Billy Porter, Fabio DeAndre, Princess Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry. We as the church must create more brave spaces for folks to speak up and tell their truths. I preached a sermon on abuse, which was celebrated And at the end of service, a woman walked up to me with tear-filled eyes and said, "Thank you. I was abused by someone in this sanctuary and they just heard your sermon." This is how we do it, but we must know what to do next. What we're missing in our churches. Folks, there is a subversive culture of abuse within our own churches. Think for just a moment. You may be experiencing abuse with the relational dynamics of your members. There may be a bully amongst you, someone who refuses to engage anything new, who may be holding your progress hostage. You may have people pleasers in your midst who try to keep the peace, and you may have a narcissistic personality type that is manipulative or triangulates or otherwise causes destructive harm to others. Often these individuals' behaviors are explained with the words, "That's just the way they are." This denial of the truth of harm allows these unhealthy relational contracts to flourish. Folks, silence is violence. We are so culturally complicit in violence that we never call it what it is. Abuse is as subtle as manipulation tactics and making disparaging comments about someone or even progress as a whole, slyly making digs at those proposing progress. Have you noticed that we rarely teach each other to erect healthy boundaries and inform perpetrators that their harmful behavior will not be tolerated? Understanding the abuse dynamics will aid you in many areas of your lives and in your churches.
Now, as we've already mentioned, this domestic violence shows up in all of our church communities. In a recent book called Church 2, How Purity Culture Upholds Abuse and How to Find Healing, author Emily Joy Allison brings this phenomenon to light primarily in the evangelical community. And while many recent scandals have focused on abuse from evangelical pastors, domestic violence and sexual abuse happens in all of our mainline churches as well. Cultural values of white supremacy, toxic masculinity, individualism, competition, and toxic theology without true accountability, remember that denial? These are deadly to the safety of everyone in our church communities, including clergy. Because guess what? Whether in the role of clergy or another church leadership position, or even a congregant, there are those who abuse as well as there are those who are abused. The cycles between these two roles in a toxic culture is why we must recognize that the church has to face this problem in a deep and ongoing way. Otherwise, we will add to the harm rather than add to the healing. Teaching and pastoral care in our churches has so often upheld these unhealthy relationship practices, as we heard from Dr. Crystal's story, and has often advised people to stay in dangerous relationships when they should have listened deeper. They should have provided information to help a person find safety and support instead. As a church, we teach that every person is a child of God, and as such, we must love and protect each person as though we actually mean that. So then, if we are explicit about our churches being safer, sacred spaces that are equipped to care about the subversive nature of abuse, we can become beacons of hope in a stormy sea. Becoming more communally sensitive to understanding the level of trauma in our society is a crucial step on the part of our churches to become part of the healing. Accountability, truth-telling, teaching healthy theology, including unpacking the abusive stories actually told in the biblical texts, as well as teaching and modeling good mental and emotional health practices, are all crucial parts of tackling this epidemic in our churches. In January of 2020, my husband and I founded the Laboratory Church. It's a trauma-informed congregation, and we follow these practices. We name, we teach, and we practice relational values that promote safety and freedom to be vulnerable and authentic. Because each of us has experienced intimate partner violence in our lives, we, as both a pastor and a marriage and family therapist, want our community to be part of the healing. As a community, we continuously evaluate and modify our safe space as needed so that we can build trust with one another in order to encourage the relational healing piece of trauma recovery. I suggest that you check out the book by Dr. Judith Herman called Trauma and Recovery. This is a process, and it must be centered in loving and curious rather than judgmental communication practices. And it includes the ability to adjust according to individual needs while also caring for the health of the entire community. At the end of the day, practicing love and non-judgment, as Jesus taught us, is the root of being a trauma-informed community. And in this, we can help those who have and are experiencing abuse to find safety and healing.
I found an educational imbalance. When I sat for my 40-hour domestic violence crisis intervention certification, I was in the room with hairstylists. Here's a little known fact. In some states, hairstylists are required to complete domestic violence crisis intervention certification to become licensed or to renew their licenses. The bond between stylist and client is often strong. According to the Professional Beauty Association, Illinois, Arkansas, and California have already passed laws mandating domestic abuse training for cosmetology school students or current salon professionals. Another 11 states, including Florida, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, and Texas, have attempted to or are working on passing similar legislation. The law, which went into effect in 2019, impacted more than 84,000 licensed cosmetologists and estheticians in Illinois alone. GA 1928 asks, why not pastors? Are we as pastors and faith leaders not tasked with setting the captives free? How are we as a denomination meeting a fraction of the numbers of trained individuals that the Professional Beauty Association has in the public realm? I pondered the question, why are hairstylists more well-trained than our pastors? Well, seminary does not adequately prepare pastors to respond appropriately to abuse in their contexts. We here, our whole pastors, are here to bridge the learning gap. The nuances and dynamics in abusive situations are complex and layered. The question, why don't you just leave, is highly inappropriate to ask someone who is experiencing abuse. Discovering why and what the proper responses are is crucial to being a safer, sacred space for folks. By destigmatizing abuse, we can bring it out of the shadows where it hides and thrives. We can destigmatize abuse by weaving it into the Christian conversation and openly offering support and resources. We as disciples have a call on our lives to heal a fragmented world. No one is more fragmented than a survivor of abuse.
GA 1928 was adopted over 2 years ago in July 2019. It has been 34 years since the last resolution on domestic violence was passed. The church realized this work in this area is insufficient, so we decided it was time for more whole disciples. The opening statement of GA 1928. Whereas John 10:10 states that Jesus came so that we may have life and have it more abundantly, something that victims of domestic and intimate partner violence are robbed of due to the abuse experiences, causing exponentially high rates of depression, despair, fear, and trauma.
We disciples must recognize our responsibility to help prevent domestic violence and intimate partner violence in all its expressions. In order to do that, we connect with local agencies for resources, offer multilingual, abuse-specific resources in our church restrooms and on your websites. Pastors and laity should be trained specifically around proper, sensitized, abuse-specific response. All expressions of the church encourage youth camps and ministries to incorporate healthy relationship, self-worth, and healthy boundary content with age-appropriate relationship red flag awareness in their programs. All expressions of the church are encouraged to increase their efforts to shatter shame, stigma, and silence by preaching and teaching responsibility on the topic of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Work together to dismantle a cultural landscape where domestic violence can thrive and hide.
GA 1928 invites you to ask your region to put domestic violence resources for your area on their website and email newsletters. Take action to bring resources, workshops, and prayer events to your community. Stay aware and engaged and become a safer space to those in your midst. You can begin your journey of empowered unsilencing by visiting tethered1.org/resources. The tools you need are all there for you, including the way that the links to churches and regions that have already put their resources on their websites. So everything is there for you. You can take the 5-hour self-guided online course, Unsilenced Domestic Violence, to educate yourself and your laity. And there is the link. It will be in the chat as well. thresholdsofthesoul.org/unsilence. And for free sermons, if you don't know what to preach for domestic violence awareness, there are over 100 free sermons on domestic violence on the Sojourner's website, sojo.net/sermon/series/100 sermons violence. So many resources for you. We must speak up about abuse, and often, and definitely during the awareness months. The National Network to End Domestic Violence offers a plethora of content to support you in your context. If we can get the next slide. In some states, there are dedicated agencies to support domestic violence education and awareness. They would have free posters, pamphlets, and sometimes even swag, right? For teen dating violence resources, you can Google breakthecycle.org and loveisrespect.org. Those are the primary months of abuse awareness. We will now move into our question and answer portion of the webinar. And Monica, will you join us and assist us with this segment?
Sure. Thank you all for all of the information that you shared with us and for inspiring us and for calling us back to what we committed to in 2019 as a General Assembly, which means as a church, committing ourselves to being educated and to resourcing our church around this particular issue. First, for a point of clarity in the chat, someone asked, and to make sure that we're all in the same, we're working with the same definitions or understandings, they asked, what is LGBTQIA? And so I just want to say that is an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning a queer, intersex, and allies. So just so that we're all on the same page and have a clear understanding together. There was also a comment and a bit of a question, and I think it's more of a comment, but maybe someone from the panel may want to speak to this, that financial, mental, and emotional abuses are the unseen abuses. How is justice served in those cases when the abuses are internal? I don't know if anyone has a reflection on that.
That's a really great question. And often, folks that are dealing with the insidious side of abuse, there is no space for them to be heard, to be recognized, or to even receive justice, right? If there are no physical signs of abuse, it is very hard to prove. So the most important thing for individuals in that situation is to find healing and to create healing spaces for individuals to reclaim themselves, because abuse in that specific genre tends to erase, right, a person's personality, their sense of empowerment, their sense of self-worth. And so creating spaces where people can reclaim that, or even to understand, right? If there are individuals that understand how complex and nuanced that type of abuse is, they can help direct individuals to resources, books, different areas of support to help them begin to put the pieces back together and possibly make some decisions that might change the trajectory of their lives.
I would also add to that great information that because part of the thing that happens is powerlessness, it's never our place to tell people what to do. If we think that they should leave, if we think that they should do X, Y, or Z, if we have a relationship with them, we can have it come in the course of the conversation, but it always has to be the choice of the person. We always have to empower people to be able to make that choice themselves.
I would like to add as well, you talked about resources, Reverend Courtney, and that is so imperative. Even as we train pastors on how to deal with domestic violence, they need to use the resources in their communities. And the community in Dayton, Ohio, it's the Artemis Center or the YWCA, where they have trained persons that can help people navigate through the situation that they're living with, whether it's financial or physical or any of the nuances of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. There are resources out there of trained people that actually deal with this every day that we need to farm out and not feel that as pastors we can help everybody through every situation. That's a very important aspect. There are resources that we can access. On tethered1.org, there are a list of some of my favorite books that would help at least the understanding and the beginning stages of how to assist individuals in that situation.
And may I add just lastly that a lot of times justice is not served in terms of the internal process that people have to go to. And so I think it's time for us to create communities of accountability and healing so that justice can be seen also for those that are survivors of abuse. So I think that's also one of the ways we want to implement care for people is actually by having the safe spaces, safer spaces and communities that they can then go to and heal internally.
Great.
I'll just
Thank you all.
I did create something at my church called a sanctuary, and the middle of the word is T-E-A. It is a space that is specifically for individuals that are dealing with difficult issues in the world that they need help processing. And it is replete with books on domestic and intimate partner violence. It is replete with Kleenex and art supplies and tea and space for folks to cry and feel. And I think it's really important for us to create more of those sanctuary spaces in the world. I see David Simmons has put a question in the chat. Should we go to that one?
Hold 1 second. I'm monitoring the chat. I wanna, there are a few folks that asked for whether we're gonna post the information. So yes, I wanna say again that we will post the webinar on the nbacares.org website and on tethered1.org. Both of those are listed in the chat feature, as well as the slide decks. And also, if you're looking at chat and you scroll to the very beginning, you have the contact information of our panelists. I want to try and get as many questions in as possible. So not everyone will get their question answered or answered perhaps as fully as you would like. And so you have contact information as well. So just wanted to point that out. So as I'm moving on down our chat, yes. So one question was, is it possible to provide the correct answers to the poll questions? We didn't go back, we kind of read those out, but didn't provide the correct answers. So if we can take a moment, and if you have those near you, speakers, and can just reread them quickly and address them, that would be great. And then I'll move to David Simmons.
I think Dr. Crystal is going to take this question.
Okay, the correct answers. Do you believe domestic violence is happening in your community? It is 100% accurate. Question number 2, domestic violence only happens in marginalized communities. That is 100% no. Question number 3, domestic violence happens mostly in Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. That is 100% no as well. Question number 4, domestic violence mainly happens in non-faith, unchurched communities. That is, again, 100% no. Question number 5, medical professionals, doctors, clergy, military, and peace police officers are considered to be the top abusers. Those are the top 4 abusers. So that is 100% yes. Question number 6, domestic violence happens in established middle or upper class families. Everyone is right, that is 100% yes. And question number 7, domestic violence happens everywhere, and that is 100% correct.
Thank you for that. I think just posing some clarity, making sure folks walk away with the accurate answers to that so that they can move forward. So in the chat, there's also a statement and a question. Domestic abuse is usually framed as an issue that women have to work through. So in counseling, getting out of the house, etc. What types of interventions target men?
I love that question because it does seem to be just a female issue, right? But when I was taking my 40-hour domestic violence crisis intervention course, I was educated around the fact that a lot of shelters offer resources to men as well. There are even shelters that include men. And one of the things that I found out that a lot of people don't know is that individuals can take advantage of resources from domestic violence shelters, but do not have to be residents. So there's free counseling, there is court advocacy. There are even programs in some areas where abusers can undergo courses to help them process their abuse behavior. And so there are quite a few resources for men specifically, but they tend to be hidden, right, under the guise of support for women. And so I just want to say out there and out loud that men can also receive services from domestic violence shelters and also call in on the hotlines. And we're, of course, providing safer, sacred space for anyone who needs support.
Excellent. I think we have time for one or two questions. So I'm going to point to a couple of questions. One is, Courtney, what has been the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the pandemic of abuse? I'm going to ask that one more time. What has been the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the pandemic of abuse?
Great question. The mandate to shelter in place, along with the catastrophic job loss and the sudden need to homeschool, meant that those who lived in abusive homes were now forced into isolation with their abuser, with no outlet or respite from them. Tensions rose as financial burdens intensified, anxiety and irritation mounted as individuals who usually had some other outlet, such as working or spending time with others, was currently or suddenly shut down. The Guardian, a news outlet based in the United Kingdom, reported that domestic violence killings more than doubled during the shelter at home period. They also reported calls to domestic violence helplines increased by 120%, while traffic to their websites is tripling. There's an unprecedented demand for refuge places. Children, too, are more vulnerable than they have ever been. Similarly, the Huffington Post reported that US senators were pushing to privatize or prioritize domestic violence survivors in COVID-19 bailout bills. This push for survivors was a reaction to a rise in domestic violence cases during the pandemic. Advocates also warned that the actual number of domestic violence cases is likely much higher, since most victims are unable to report or seek help when they're stuck at home with their abusers.
Thank you. There's so many other things that we could certainly ask, but I think I want to close on this question or request, actually. Could you give us some examples of what constitutes safer, sacred spaces?
Sure. So part of what has been mentioned multiple times is accountability. We have to have a place where we can refer abusers to get help. We have to have places we can get abuse victims to receive help. And we have to create a culture where there isn't shame, there isn't judgment, and we have to be compassionate and approach people with love. And as I mentioned, don't tell people what to do, just be available to listen and reinforce that they are not wrong for coming to you. So we also have to get rid of the shame and the stigma and say that even if you are an abuser, it's not that you're an evil person. It's that you have maybe been abused. And there's, like I said before, there's so much violence. We need to focus on finding the good in people and practicing the good relationship qualities like trust, telling the truth, being supportive of people without judgment, and doing all of those things on a regular basis. Consistency also matters. So you can't be safe one minute and then, all of a sudden, like have a moment of judgment. I mean, you really have to be careful how you talk to people so that they know that you are consistent, you are non-judgmental, you are present with them no matter what. Even if you don't have the answers, your presence and your compassion is key.
Thank you. I mean, I think what you point to is that faith communities, in this case, congregations, have an opportunity here, right, to be safer. I really like that language, safer, sacred spaces. And what's required is training and resources and support. And we have that. We obviously have that here through Whole Disciples, which we're so thankful for each one of you and for the rest of the team doing this work, committed to this work. And now that we know better, right, we can do better. We know better, we can do better as faith leaders, as faith communities, and as the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in particular. We have a poetic moment by Reverend Yani Davis, and so I'm going to turn it over to you, to conclude this portion of our presentation this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being in attendance. I'm so glad we get to go out and share all of this information that we received and continue to do this great, great work. Please join us. Please join us. And this piece is entitled, Who We Are, Who We Are. Where did you last feel seen in a relationship with another? Caught in a complex web of conflict and discord, we are the holy listeners, devoted to action and change. When was the last time your soul was at peace, working towards healing the spaces that have been disrupted within you by a violent society? We will rise and create sacred space in the midst of the storm. When was the last time someone heard you cry out in the wilderness? Navigating obstacles and challenges we were never supposed to shield our body, minds, and spirits from. We will rise as the healers, storytellers, and truth tellers of this generation. When was the last time someone shielded you from the devastation of the outside world? Sinking into the isms and schisms created with hope in mind. We are the survivors and the creators of sanctuary. Why has silence become our go-to? Living in an age of fear and loss, we will rise up and lead the people. Where has safer, brave space gone? Present in a reality that strips us of our humanity, we will rise and remember our divinity. When was the last time your soul was at peace? Working towards healing everything within. We will rise and speak peace in the midst of violence. When was the last time you dedicated your life to making the world a more secure place for the people of the world, healing from the harm we have experienced? We are rising. We are healing. And we are whole. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Yani. Thank you, Reverend Courtney, Reverend Dr. Crystal, Reverend Amie, and again to the Whole Disciples ministry. We are blessed by your work and we're honored by your presence here today. In the chat box, there, as I mentioned earlier, there are some relevant links for websites and resources. Please, as I bring us to a close, feel free to scroll through the chat feature and grab those links. And again, this will be posted, so you'll have access to those links in the coming days. We encourage you to take whatever actions you can in supporting the work against domestic violence and intimate partner violence and all causes of justice and equity for all. We ask you to join NBA in our work of creating justice. Some of the ways you can be involved and stay involved with our work and informed by our work is to sign up for our e-newsletter at nbacares.org/e-news. And there are a few check boxes you can mark to let us know that what your interests might be. We also encourage you to visit the resource section of our website, where we have a multitude of educational materials, articles, videos, and worship ideas for you to access for free. Did you hear that? For free. Finally, we ask that you support. We ask for your support. As we all know, it's been a difficult time for all of us on all fronts. Your generous gifts to NBA continue to support in creating communities of compassion, care, and justice, and opportunities for innovative conversation groups such as this to come together to do the work of responding to the issues that impact all of us. Your donations also support our various grant programs to support organizational and leadership development among Disciples Ministries. We are ever grateful for these blessings. Thank you for your time this evening, this afternoon, wherever you may be. And please reach out to us and to our panel and to Whole Disciples. with any questions or interests or ways or questions around how you can be involved. We hope to see you again in the next events, and we thank you. Bye-bye.